Thank you, Chair. I would also like to thank Martin Belov and the local organizers of this impressive conference for the possibility to be here and to discuss with you. The topic of my paper is part of a long-lasting research endeavor concerning the relationship between constitutional code and politics and the political office holders, a relation in which the mechanisms for appointing and or electing the members, the judges of constitutional court, is an integral, crucial part. I will start from two examples in order to contextualize the thesis underlying my presentation. In July 2018, the Italian Parliament broke a 2-year deadlock and elected a new judge at the Constitutional Court, 2 years after that post had become vacant. Although this stalemate eventually came to an end, it testified once again to the decline of pre-existing constitutional conventions concerning the election of judges of the Italian Constitutional Court, a part of the judges of the Italian Constitutional Court, by the Parliament, and the difficulty to bring out new, viable constitutional conventions. Second example, in February 2019, the presidents of the French Republic and the presidents of the 2 legislative assemblies of France appointed 3 new members of the Conseil Constitutionnel. One of them, former Prime Minister Alain Juppé, is a highly respected senior statesman who was convicted for abuse of public funds in the early 2000s. The 2 other picks for the position of member of the Conseil Constitutionnel were mainly said to be close, respectively, to President Macron and to the President of the Senate. On the whole, the highly political flavor of these appointments seemed to suggest that the ongoing transformation of the Conseil Constitutionnel to a fully fledged constitutional court was still far from being completed. These are just 2 examples showing that the rules relating to the composition of constitutional courts, rules which play a crucial role in safeguarding and enhancing their independence and accountability, are now subject to growing tensions. In fact, when I say the rules relating to the selection of constitutional judges, I refer to a number of distinct underlying issues. There is the issue of independence, of course, professional qualifications of the nominees, transparency and openness of the selection procedure, and its suitability for ensuring the independence and the standing of the concerned institution. In many jurisdictions in which there are attempts at reforming the constitutional code, the organ performing constitutional review, the composition of the constitutional court and the mode of selection of its members is quite often the first and perhaps the only point which is seriously examined in depth by constitutional by the Constitution amending power. The purpose of my presentation is to make some points on the main issues connected on the selection of constitutional judges in continental Europe. By continental Europe, I mean a number of jurisdictions in which constitutional courts were established following more or less closely, with greater or lesser adaptations, the Kesenian model, which had its first expression in Austria in the 1920s. In so doing, I'm considering both jurisdictions in the West and the East, jurisdictions in which there is a perceived crisis of representative democracy, or perhaps in Central and Eastern Europe, a possible turn towards a liberal policy course. In this comparative scenario, the outlier, the main outlier of course, but it's a fundamental outlier, is France. When I say Kesenian model and I focus on the selection of constitutional judges, I basically mean that a quota, or perhaps all the members of a constitutional court are either elected by the legislature, and perhaps another quota of them are appointed by the head of state. In its original drafting, dating back to 1920, in fact, the Austrian federal constitutional law, which was powerfully, although not exclusively, influenced by Kelsen's thought, provided for a constitutional court whose members would be elected either by the lower house of Austria or by the federal upper house, the Bundesrat. And interestingly, no special qualification were required at the very starting. The underlying idea, probably, was that some kind of proximity between the constitutional court and the legislature was, if not necessary, at least desirable. Moreover, according to Kelsen's conceptual framework at that time, this was instrumental in ensuring the independence of the court from the executive. Be that as it may, there was a tight link between the novel institution of constitutional adjudication and protection of political minorities in a constitutional democracy. According to a more recent comparative account by Victor Ferrer-Scomedia, this selection model makes it possible to minimize, at least to some extent, democratic objections against the existence and the operation of constitutional adjudication. In fact, the Austrian model of the origin has been amended in a number of times, so the professional requirements and qualification have been strengthened over time. What I'm interested in is its comparative success throughout Europe, with some jurisdictions receiving the basic feature of the original model more closely, and others less so. On the first hand, on the one side, we can mention some jurisdictions in which all of the judges of the constitutional court are elected by the legislature, either be it unicameral or bicameral, like Germany and some countries in Central and Eastern Europe, like Hungary and Poland. Of course, here we have quite similar constitutional arrangements, which in fact have functioned in very different ways according to the existence of a strong party system, strong balanced party system, ensuring the emergence of solid constitutional conventions, the existence of effective majority requirements, perhaps even of a proportional electoral law ensuring an adequate representation of the minority parties and groups, and this also explains the reasons the German model and the models of the constitutional court in Central and Eastern Europe have gone different ways over the last few years. Other constitutional courts in Europe can be traced back to this model, to the Kelsenian model of having most of the judges elected by parliament, although with some differences, and mainly the involvement of other institutions than the elected legislature in the selection of constitutional judges. This is quite typical, I would say, of post-authoritarian constitutional orders during transition processes in which mutual distrust among the involved actors, including not only the main political actors, but also bureaucrats, the ordinary judiciary, the administrative judiciary, plays a key role in influencing the way the constitutional adjudication and the organ, institution which is entrusted with the function of constitutional adjudication are designed, are shaped. I'm mainly referring to the Italian model, the Spanish model, with several institutions involved in the election or appointment of constitutional judges, including the head of state in Italy, the highest courts in Italy, the higher council of the judiciary in Spain. In theoretical terms, we can find here a reflection of what Tom Ginsburg has described as an insurance model active in transition processes, according to which all the involved actors try to minimize the risks related to the counterpart seizing most of the political power. In this scenario, of course, as I mentioned, the French Conseil Constitutionnel is an obvious, although influential, outlier. So this is more or less the comparative scenario as we have known it during the last few decades. Now I'm interested in making some rapid points regarding the challenges of the more recent years. In my view, those challenges, those risks, lines of criticism have to do with a key element in this conceptual framework, that is the way representative democracy functions, and when it comes to the way representative democracy functions, also the role of political parties. In my view, there are basically three lines of criticism. On the one side, there is a trend towards highlighting the importance of having constitutional courts which somehow reflect the inherent pluralism in contemporary constitutional democracies. This need is perceived as strongest in federal or regional orders, in which quite often the sub-state units complain that there is some centralizing bias of the constitutional courts. This has been the case in Italy and to some extent in Spain as well. In general terms, the reform of the constitutional, a constitutional court which would make it possible for sub-state units to be involved in the selection process should be preceded by a reform of the second chamber. However, there is a risk that a partisan capture of a federalized or regionalized second chamber eventually undermines these attempts. The second line of criticism has directly to do with the role of political parties in the selection process, and this can happen at least in two ways. On the one hand, the decline and even the breakdown of a long-established party system may bring about a difficulty to rely on conventions of the constitutions relating to the selection of constitutional judges, with no alternative mechanisms at hand, and an actual risk of triggering a prejudice for the very functioning of the court. This was the case in Italy when some posts of justice were vacant and it was impossible to replace them on time. On the opposite side of the spectrum, party systems that have not been weakened by the increasing diversity and polarization of present-day societies cast a shadow over the openness of the selection process. This is particularly true, although with differences in Spain and Germany. I'll just mention some details concerning the German case, in which the election of judges by the Bundestag actually takes place within an ad hoc electoral committee acting confidentially. It's an institutional mechanism that has been ably criticized. According to some scholars, the election of constitutional judges in Germany is even more secret than the election of the Pope, and the confidentiality of the activities said to be instrumental in facilitating closed-doors negotiations between the two leading parties of German constitutional democracy, the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats. In turn, defenders of the virtues of the current state of affairs, including the Constitutional Court itself in a judgment rendered in 2012, argued that there is a constitutional role of political parties in the parliamentary regime of Germany, and that the delicate tests of the Bundesverfassungsgericht makes such a mechanism at least useful, and interestingly, it's pointless, it's useless to make comparison between those mechanisms which are rooted in the European constitutional culture and the highly public advice and consent mechanism in the United States. The final difficulty, which has to do with the role of political parties and the crisis of democracies, has to do with the partisan culture by the ruling parties, of constitutional court by the ruling parties in Central and Eastern Europe, and hints at the difficulty to keep these institutions at bay from one-party control when the system of checks and balances is deliberately put under strain. The third and final line of criticism has to do with the need for having some form of public scrutiny of the nominees and consequently greater transparency of the process. Here again, the comparative scenario is influenced by a number of significant examples, first and foremost on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, but also and with a different kind of publicity with the selection of the judges of the Court of Justice of the European Union. There has been an attempt at changing a well-rooted state of affairs in France, although it has not been exempt from criticism, as the latest waves of nomination somehow show, but we can consider this with greater detail during the following debate. So, and to conclude, the current crisis of representative democracy in Europe and the West, a crisis which of course is multifaceted, open to multiple possible outcomes with very different political and constitutional strategies by the actors involved, is not without consequences for the issue of the selection of constitutional judges. And in some respects, as I have tried to argue, it also poses a significant challenge for the way the European model of constitutional adjudication was conceived of in the first half of the 20th century and later with ever greater success in the second half of the last century. It goes without saying that selection processes should not be considered alone. For instance, the existence or the absence of dissenting opinion is another mechanism which plays a crucial role in shaping the relationship between one constitutional court and the political environment. On the whole, and this is my argument, it seems that hybrid models, like the Italian one, present, for all their possible flaws, a number of positive features. They have at least two characteristics that make them fit to address today's challenges. On the one hand, they make it easier to take into account the increasing pluralism and even polarization of today's European societies. On the other hand, constitutional courts currently operate in a complex system in which they interact either formally or informally with the political branches, the public, and the other domestic, supranational, and international courts. A leading German scholar in public law, Joseph Hiesens, has coined the definition of the three tension fields within which the German Federal Constitutional Courts operates. The current Vice President of the Italian Constitutional Court, Marta Cartabia, has highlighted the existence of a continuity between a pluralistic model of selection and this relationality in the constitutional regulation of constitutional court. So, the point is, there is a continuity between the functions and the constitutional courts and the rules relating to the selection of their members, and the awareness of this link under the current circumstances and challenges is crucial both for comparative analysis and possibly for discussion about possible reform. Thank you for your attention.